quit. Right there in the hospital parking lot, still in her scrubs, while my mother stood 3 feet away with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That was the moment I understood exactly what kind of war I was walking into. My name is Joel, and 6 months ago, I watched the woman I'd spent 4 years building a life with get quietly, systematically dismantled by my own family. Not loudly. Not with screaming. That's what made it so hard to see. They were surgical about it. Vera and I met at a friend's birthday party when I was 28. She was a pediatric nurse. She had flour on her sleeve from baking something for the host, and she was completely unbothered by it. I thought that was the most interesting thing about a person I'd ever seen. We were together for 2 years before I proposed, and in that whole time, she never once complained about my family, even when she had every reason to. My mother had opinions. My older brother had comments. And my father, who'd built a mid-size HVAC contracting company from nothing and considered that the defining proof of his judgment, had what he called concerns. None of them were specific. None of them had evidence. It was always just this ambient, low-grade disapproval that followed Vera into every room like a smell they'd all agreed not to name out loud. She's not serious enough. She doesn't understand what we've built. She's sweet, Joel, but is she your partner or your project? That last one was my mother. At Christmas, 2 weeks after Vera had worked a double shift on Christmas Eve and still showed up to dinner with a homemade pie. I didn't say anything. I told myself families take time to adjust. I told myself it would smooth out. I was wrong, and that mistake cost Vera more than I can properly account for. The thing about my family is that they're not cruel people in the obvious sense. They go to church. They donate to local causes. My father coaches youth baseball in the off-season. They are, by every external measure, good, salt-of-the-earth people, which meant that what they did to Vera wasn't recognizable as cruelty until you stood far enough back to see the full shape of it. It started small, not inviting her to things and then mentioning those things afterward in her presence. Asking about her career in a tone that suggested nursing was a phase. Talking about the business around her as though she wasn't in the room, as though she had no stake in my life, as though I was still just their youngest son and she was a temporary arrangement. My brother was the worst for that. He'd look past her when he talked to me, directly past her, like she was furniture. She never snapped. She never made me choose. She'd come home from those dinners and take a long shower and then come sit with me on the couch and say, "Do you think they'll ever just let me in?" And I'd say yes, because I believed it, because the alternative was something I wasn't ready to look at. We got married last April, small ceremony, about 40 people at a garden venue outside the city. Her best friend from nursing school flew in. My college roommate got ordained online and officiated. It was exactly what we wanted. My family was there, dressed nicely, smiling in the photos. The reception was where it started to unravel, though I didn't see it happening in real time. I was busy being happy. I was dancing with my wife, and she was laughing at something the DJ said. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is the version of my life I chose correctly. What I didn't know was that 2 tables over, my mother was talking to Vera's supervisor, her actual nursing supervisor, who had been invited as Vera's guest. I didn't know what was said. Not that night. Not for another 3 weeks. The Monday after we got back from our honeymoon, Vera came home from work and sat down at the kitchen table without taking her coat off. She just sat there. I came out of the bedroom and looked at her and felt my stomach drop. "My supervisor called me into her office today," she said. "Someone made a complaint against me." I sat down across from her. "What kind of complaint?" She looked at the table. "Patient misconduct. That I'd been accessing patient files I wasn't assigned to. That I'd been speaking inappropriately about patients outside the hospital." She finally looked up at me. "Joel, I have never done either of those things. Not once." We didn't know where it came from. Not yet. She was suspended pending investigation. Paid leave, which sounds merciful until you understand that for Vera, nursing wasn't just a job. It was the thing she'd oriented her entire adult life around. She'd worked 2 jobs all through nursing school. She'd deferred things, given things up, made herself smaller in 100 different ways to become a pediatric nurse. And now she was sitting at home in her coat at 4 in the afternoon because someone had called the hospital with a story. I want to tell you I handled it perfectly. I want to say I was a rock. But the truth is that those first 2 weeks I was more confused than anything else. I didn't understand what was happening. I kept waiting for the investigation to conclude and clear her, because of course it would. Of course. Except the investigation found supporting documentation. Anonymous emails forwarded to the hospital's ethics line, with screenshots that appeared to show Vera in a private conversation discussing a patient's case. The screenshots were partial, stripped of context, but they looked real enough to someone who didn't know better. Her supervisor was apologetic. "We have to follow the process," she said. "I'm sorry, Vera." It was my father-in-law who finally said what I'd been circling. We were all at his house, Vera and I and her parents, trying to figure out what to do, and he set down his coffee cup and looked at me and said, quietly, "Joel, this started right after your family had access to her colleagues at the wedding. I need you to think about that." I didn't want to. I genuinely didn't want to. I drove to my mother's house that evening. I sat across from her at the kitchen table where I'd done homework as a kid, and I looked at her face and I asked her directly, "Did you say something to Vera's supervisor at the wedding?" She didn't even flinch. I expressed some concerns, yes. I have a right to do that. What concerns? About her judgment. About the kind of person she is outside of work. People in healthcare positions have to be held to a standard, Joel. I was thinking about those kids. You're thinking about those kids, I repeated. I was thinking about our family, she said, and dropped the pretense. She is not right for you. She never was. And if I had to make a hard phone call to help you see that, then I made it. I left. I drove around for an hour. I didn't go back inside. I want to be honest about what happened next, because it wasn't immediate. I didn't ride straight into action. I sat with it for 2 days. I was angry, but I was also terrified, because what my mother had done wasn't just cruel. It was calculated. It had used institutions, formal processes, professional consequences. She'd found a lever that looked nothing like what it was. And I understood, in those 2 days, that feeling betrayed wasn't going to be enough. I needed to actually undo it. Vera's best friend, who I'll call by her first name Petra, I'm not using last names, had kept in close contact with us through all of this. Petra had gone back home after the wedding, but she was on the phone with Vera almost every day. And Petra, who'd spent 6 years in hospital administration before moving into healthcare consulting, had a very particular skill set that was about to become relevant. "Forward me everything," she said, when I explained what my mother had told me. Every email Vera's received from the hospital. Every formal communication, everything. I did. And over the following week, Petra worked through it and identified something the hospital's own investigators had missed. The metadata on the forwarded screenshots was inconsistent. The timestamps on the original messages didn't match the platform's formatting from that period. Someone had reconstructed those screenshots, not captured them. They were fabrications. There's a specific feeling that comes from finding out someone in your own family manufactured false evidence to end your wife's career. I don't have a clean word for it. It isn't just anger. It's a kind of grief, too. Because it means the person you thought they were was never real. I went to a healthcare attorney. He reviewed Petra's findings and agreed they were significant. "This is defamation," he said, "and, if it can be proven that the complaint originated with a specific individual who knew the information was false, you're looking at tortious interference with employment." We documented everything. The attorney sent a formal letter to the hospital outlining the metadata discrepancies and requesting the original source information for the ethics complaint under the relevant disclosure provisions. The hospital, to its credit, cooperated. Within 10 days, they had confirmation that the anonymous tip line submission had originated from an email address that traced back through 2 forwarding layers to an account registered in my mother's name. She'd made one mistake. She'd used an email address she'd set up for what she called family newsletter updates. She thought it was untraceable because she'd never used it for anything professional. She didn't understand how metadata worked. I did not call her. I didn't go back to that kitchen table. Instead, I called my brother. We met at a coffee shop, which was deliberately neutral ground. He came in already on the defensive. arms crossed before he even sat down. He knew something was coming. You could tell by the way he wouldn't quite hold eye contact. "I need to know how involved you were," I said. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do." He looked at his coffee. "Mom was trying to protect you." "From what?" He didn't answer. "From a woman who has done nothing but show up for me for 4 years," I said. "From someone who works nights so sick kids have a nurse who actually cares." "From what exactly?" "She's not family." He said it quietly like it explained everything. "She's my wife," I said. "She's the only family I chose." I left him sitting there. Here's what I did next. And I want to be precise about it because I'm not interested in making it sound more dramatic than it was. I didn't go to the press. I didn't set out to destroy anyone. I went back to the attorney, and I followed the process. The attorney filed a defamation and tortious interference complaint. He sent a formal pre-litigation notice to my mother with the evidence attached. The hospital, once they understood the full picture, cleared Vera completely. She was reinstated with back pay and a formal written apology from the director of nursing. That part happened first. Vera got her job back. She found out via a phone call on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in our kitchen. She didn't cry the way I expected. She just went very still, and then she said, "Okay," to the director, and "Thank you." And she hung up and looked at me, and her face did something complicated that I don't know how to describe except that it was not relief. It was more like a person realizing how close they'd come to losing something they'd spent a decade building. "I want to go back next Monday," she said. "I don't want to wait." "Then we'll make that happen," I said. The legal case proceeded. My mother's attorney reached out within a week of receiving the complaint, proposing a settlement, a quiet resolution, no admission of wrongdoing, confidentiality clause, a financial figure that I will not specify but was, in the attorney's words, an opening offer from someone who understands their position is weak. I declined. Not because I wanted more money, because a confidentiality clause meant my mother would go on telling the story her way. It meant no one would know what she'd actually done, and I had made a decision, somewhere in those 2 days when I was driving around trying to get my head straight, that what happened to Vera was not going to be quietly absorbed into family history like everything else. It was going to be named. My father called me the night after the settlement was declined. He'd always been quieter than my mother, more reserved. He'd never said anything directly cruel to Vera, which I had, for a long time, interpreted as tolerance. I understood now that it was just a different kind of complicity. "This is going to tear the family apart," he said. "The family tore itself apart," I said. "I'm just the one saying it out loud. Your mother made a mistake." "She made a decision," I said. "Mistakes are accidents. She researched the hospital's ethics process. She built a false paper trail. She spent time on this. That's not a mistake." Long silence. "What do you want, Joel?" "I want Vera to be able to go to work without wondering whether the people who are supposed to love me have made any other calls," I said. "I want there to be a record. I want it to mean something." He didn't have an answer for that. I don't think he'd ever in his life been in a situation where the expected move, smooth it over, minimize it, absorb it, wasn't available to him. The case settled eventually, 8 weeks later. My mother's attorney came back with new terms. No confidentiality clause. A formal written acknowledgement of the conduct. The financial settlement went to a nonprofit that funds nursing scholarships. That last part was Vera's idea, and when she said it, I wanted to marry her all over again. My brother never apologized. He sent a single text, 5 words. "I hope you're doing okay." I read it twice and put my phone down and didn't respond. My father came to see us about 2 months after the settlement. He showed up unannounced on a Sunday morning, which is something he'd never done in my adult life. He stood on our front step and looked old in a way I hadn't seen before. And he said, "I should have stopped her. I knew something was wrong at that wedding, and I didn't ask what it was. I should have asked." I let him in. Vera made coffee. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't resolved, and it wasn't the movies. But it was a door staying open, which is different from a door swinging wide. My mother and I have not spoken since I left her kitchen that evening. Her attorney communicates with mine. I don't know what she tells people. I don't need to. What I do know is this. Vera went back to work that Monday the way she said she wanted to. She texted me at 7:14 a.m. before her shift started, a single line. "The kids are here. I'm okay." I sat in our apartment with my coffee and read that text probably 4 times. There's a version of this story where I talk about winning, where I frame what happened as a battle with a scoreboard. But that's not how it felt from the inside. What it felt like was watching someone I love be treated as a problem to be managed, and deciding that I wasn't going to manage it quietly along with everyone else. What it felt like was learning that protecting the people you love sometimes means being willing to stop protecting the version of your family that only exists in your own head. My mother thought that as she dismantled Vera's career, I would come back. That without her job, without that sense of self, Vera would drift and I would drift with her. And eventually I'd land back in the family orbit where she could see me clearly and decide who I was supposed to be. She didn't understand that Vera's job wasn't the thing holding us together. We were the thing holding us together. And the harder they pushed, the more certain I became of that. We still live in the same apartment. We're looking at houses now, not for any particular reason, except that Vera said she wants a yard, and I want her to have one. Last weekend, we drove around for 3 hours looking at neighborhoods, stopping for lunch at a diner, arguing mildly about whether we actually need a garage. It was the most ordinary afternoon. I keep thinking about it. On the drive home, she said, "Do you think you'll ever talk to your mother again?" I thought about it for a while. "Maybe," I said, "if she ever actually understands what she did. Not just regrets the outcome, understands it." "What's the difference?" "Regret is about consequences," I said. "Understanding is about her, about why she thought she had the right." Vera looked out the window. "That might take a long time." "I know," I said. "I'm not holding the door open forever." She nodded, and then after a minute she said, "I want the house with the big back window, the one on Alderton Street." And just like that, we were talking about the window. That's what they never account for. The people who try to use your life against you. They assume that if they can make you hurt enough, you'll stop moving forward. They don't understand that some people, when they're hurt enough, just get very clear about where they're going. Vera got clear, and I followed her. Whatever my mother thought she was protecting, it wasn't her son. It was her own idea of what her son's life was supposed to look like. The day I finally understood that distinction was the day I stopped trying to earn something that was never actually being offered. The house on Alderton Street has a big back window and a yard that's going to need a lot of work. We put in an offer this morning. I keep coming back to the moment Vera sat down at our kitchen table still wearing her coat. That image. She hadn't even taken it off. Like some part of her body already knew she wasn't staying long, that the ground under her had shifted and she didn't know where to put herself yet. I think about that moment a lot, because it's where the story actually started for me. Not at the wedding, not in my mother's kitchen, but right there in that small quiet between her sitting down and me walking out of the bedroom and seeing her face. What happened to us wasn't a single bad decision. It was a series of choices made over years by people who believed that love was a resource to be managed rather than a thing you extend freely. My mother spent years deciding Vera was a problem, and when you spend long enough deciding something, eventually you start looking for ways to make it true. That's the mechanism underneath what she did. Not rage, not even malice in the explosive sense, just a slow, grinding certainty that she was right and that the outcome justified whatever she needed to do to reach it. That kind of thinking doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly, and by the time it acts, it looks, to the person doing it, completely reasonable. I'm not a person who talks about right and wrong in big abstract terms. But I do believe that the way you treat people when you think you can get away with it is the most honest version of your character there is. My mother thought she was getting away with it. She'd built layers between herself and the consequence. An anonymous email address, forwarded screenshots, a formal process that would do the damage for her. She was wrong, not because the universe stepped in to correct her, but because she made a technical mistake, and because Vera had a friend who knew how to read metadata, and because I finally stopped waiting for things to smooth over on their own. That last part is the one I have to sit with. I spent years telling myself that patience was a form of loyalty. That tolerating a low-grade hostility, the comments, the way my brother looked past Vera in every room, was something I was doing for the family. I wasn't. I was doing it for myself. Because confronting it would have cost me something I wasn't ready to give up. The comfortable story of who my family was. That story was a lie I'd been maintaining longer than my mother had been maintaining hers. What got us through, and I mean actually through, not just legally cleared but actually intact as a couple, was three things working together. The first was Vera herself. Her steadiness under pressure wasn't passivity. It was a form of clarity. She knew who she was, and she didn't let the accusation rewrite that, even when the institution was treating it as credible. That's not nothing. That's the kind of internal honesty that most people only find out whether they have when something is genuinely at stake. The second was thinking clearly when every instinct was telling me to react emotionally. Petra finding the metadata discrepancy didn't happen because we were lucky. It happened because instead of going straight to my mother's house and screaming, I slowed down enough to ask what we actually needed and who might know how to get it. Anger without direction just burns you. Anger with a plan is a different thing entirely. The third was the willingness to let something end. I couldn't protect Vera and protect the version of my family I'd been carrying around in my head at the same time. When I finally accepted that, everything became simpler. Not easier. Simpler. The house on Alderton Street closes next month. The yard is going to take all summer.